Have you ever found sprouted potatoes in your kitchen and wondered whether or not you could plant them out in the garden? Well, if you've searched this topic, I'm sure you have found the varying opinions out there. Some people say absolutely not. Some people say yes. So stick with me throughout this video because I'm going to be sharing the times when you can plant store-bought potatoes and the certain situations when you can't, plus the step-by-step process of planting potatoes as a whole. But before we jump in, I want to quickly go over my climate and gardening zone so that you can better understand and adjust your planting times if necessary. I'm in the Central Valley of California and we are zone 9B. I'm planting right now at the end of September and I'm hoping to get a harvest before winter arrives. We have pretty mild winters and we do get a few frosts here and there, but I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get my harvest prior to the pretty cold weather. But if I need to, I'll overwinter the potatoes. But if you need to, you can plant again in spring. So apply these tactics to your own garden, but adjust the planting times if necessary. But I would really like to encourage you to just test out new things. Test out planting times, test out new planting tactics and plants. The thing when you search the internet is that the gardening knowledge and tips out there are based on specific areas and climates, and unless you really test it for yourself and see what works, you're never really going to know what works for you in your garden. And so that's exactly what we're doing with these store-bought potatoes. I've never planted store-bought potatoes before, but we're going to test it out here in the garden and see how they do. So the reason why many people claim that you cannot plant store-bought potatoes is because a lot of store-bought potatoes are treated with a chemical that prevents them from sprouting. However, if you have a potato that's actually sprouting, that means it's going to grow because it's already sprouted. But if you're going to buy potatoes from the store specifically for trying to plant, then I suggest buying organic potatoes because those shouldn't be treated with any chemicals. Alrighty, and now that you have your sprouted potatoes, it's time to decide whether or not you want to plant them whole or cut them up into chunks. So small potatoes, about the size of a golf ball or smaller, should always be planted whole. Or if you have a potato that has only 1 to 3 eyes, I would suggest just planting that potato whole. You can plant larger potatoes whole as well, but the benefit of cutting them up into chunks means that you're going to get more plants per potato because each chunk will grow a separate potato plant. So if you have a potato that you are going to cut into chunks, you want to make sure that you try to keep at least 2 eyes per chunk. So that might mean you can cut that potato into 2 chunks or possibly 3 depending on the size. So if you are going to cut up larger potatoes into chunks, like I mentioned, make sure you have at least 2 eyes per chunk, and then you want to let those pieces sit for a couple of days so that the flesh side can cure over. And that just prevents rot and disease when you're planting the potatoes. But then also keep in mind, if a potato hasn't sprouted yet and it's just in the ground, it can still grow sprouts. You don't have to actually let it sprout first. That's why potatoes that happen to be left out in the garden can still grow the following season if they weren't harvested. But the benefit to letting your potatoes sprout first is that you're going to get a head start on the growing. And now on to planting the potatoes. So you can either plant in raised beds, directly in the ground, in containers, in grow bags, really whatever sort of method you want. It just depends on your space and your situation. If you plant in smaller containers, keep in mind you may only be able to plant 1 or 2 potato plants, but that's fine. You're still going to get potatoes from that. Or you can plant directly in the ground in a large plot of land, and that's going to give you a ton of potatoes, being that you have the right kind of soil. You want loose, well-draining soil. If you have soil that's too hard and compacted and stays really wet and soggy, you're likely going to end up with diseased potatoes. And now you just need to decide on your method for planting. You can do trenches, you can do an individual hole for each potato. Some people even put their potatoes sort of on top of the ground and just cover them up with compost and straw. Choose whatever method seems right for you. There's benefits to all of them. Some people say they get the best crop of potatoes with trenches. Some people say they get a great crop just by topping them with a whole bunch of soil and compost and straw and never really doing anything. It's one of those things that you just need to test out. I'm doing trenches. I'm going to show you the process in just a minute. But the really important thing to remember is that potatoes cannot be exposed to the sunlight. Potatoes contain a toxin called solanine, and they already contain the toxin, so it's fine in small amounts. But when they're exposed to the sunlight, you get what are called green potatoes, which have really high levels of that toxin, and it makes the potatoes bitter, and you really shouldn't eat them anymore at that point. So if they're never exposed to sunlight, you should always be fine, but you can even get green potatoes if you just store your potatoes improperly. So if they're in the kitchen in the direct light, you can get what are called green potatoes, and those are going to be bitter, and you should just toss them out. Okay, so I'm going to be planting my potatoes in a trench that I dug that's about 4 to 6 inches deep. I'm going to put my seed potatoes every 8 inches apart with the eyes facing upwards. If you're planting larger potatoes, you may want to space them out further, around 12 to 15 inches apart. And then as my potato plants start growing, I'm just going to continue filling in the trench with soil and eventually the entire trench will be filled in, and at that point I'll probably add some straw to cover up the garden bed. So the process of filling in that trench is called hilling up your potatoes, and it just means that you plant your potatoes so deep, whatever you choose, usually it's around 6 inches or so, and then you fill in that trench as the potato plant grows upwards. A common thing that I see people get confused when they hear hilling potatoes is that they make a mound of soil that looks like a hill, and then they stick their potatoes in there. But that's not really what hilling means. Hilling means planting potatoes deeper and then filling in that trench so that you hill up with soil. If you were to just plant your potatoes in a mound, they're going to quickly grow out of that soil and then they're going to be exposed to the light. So that's not an ideal situation. And now it's just time to wait for germination. Germination should occur in about 2 to 4 weeks. And in the meantime, I'm just going to keep the soil bed moist but not overly saturated with water. You don't want to water too much in the beginning when your plants are still trying to develop the plant growth. You don't want the potatoes in the soil to rot. Once the plants do emerge, you can water a bit more, but if you start to get rain, then you can likely just let rain do all the work for you. Right now I do have my garden set up on irrigation, and I'm going to keep that running until we start getting rain, or if we happen to not get rain, it's there as a backup. It is nice having the irrigation set up because it's just kind of now a set it and forget it. I'm going to wait for the plants to emerge and watch the growth and see what happens. And if you are interested in setting your garden up on irrigation, right now is a great time to do it. The fall is cooler, and so if you get it set up now, you won't have to struggle with the hot temperatures of summer, and then by the time your spring garden comes, you will be all set and ready to go. And in this video right here, I go over all of the irrigation parts that I recommend and use. So if you're interested in setting your garden up in irrigation, that video will be really helpful. And so head there next, and I will see you there.